to the Kung Fu book review. Today we are going to be doing The Power of Internal Martial Arts, which is this big book here, and it is a big book, right, by this guy, B.K. Frantzis, right? So I would just call it the Big Book of Bagua, or the Big Book of Internal Kung Fu, right? Because it's a big book and it covers all three of the internal martial arts. Also, what is an internal martial art? There's also a whole section about speed and power generation in internal martial arts. There's also massive appendices, and also his own personal martial arts journey through so many different martial arts, right? He started in Japanese martial arts and then moved through other stuff and did loads of things. Overall, I think it's a brilliant book. If you're studying internal martial arts, I think it's a great book to read, just to get your head into the game and think about specifically, you know, if you're studying one of Tai Chi, Bagua, or Xingyi, what it's like. Is this really the right one for you? Maybe you're, because this, for example, I read this book and I was like, I was already doing Tai Chi and Wing Chun. And then I was like, man, I really want to try some of these other internal martial arts, you know, specifically Xingyi. I was like, that is awesome. Like there's a like a version of Tai Chi that's like a military focused, that's like way more aggressive and violent with like heavy contact training. Sold, right? Okay, so yeah, so this book was really inspiring for me personally, because he went on this amazing journey of discovery where he trained with loads of different people and did loads of different styles, and started in, you know, judo and karate, you know, did some aikido actually in the main training dojo at with Morei Shiba in Tokyo. It was amazing, right? He's done all this stuff, and then he started doing internal martial arts and dropped them all and went on to do Chinese martial arts. And on top of that, he did all sorts of different ones: Mantis, Northern Shaolin, Wing Chun, Tai Chi, Xingyi, Bagua. And it's really inspired me to sort of do similar, actually. So because I had a very similar experience in my own training. So I began with judo, and then did karate for a number of years. But then when I experienced Chinese martial arts, I was kind of similar. I had this kind of blown away moment where I was like, wow, they really know all the details and the theory, and it's all connected. You know, it's just much deeper, right? I found, at least, right? So yeah, and then he inspired me to also go and train with lots of different people, and not just accept one person's way as the way, and to go and explore and train all sorts of different styles and find out what's best for you. Yeah, so great, really big fan of this book. So I would say the one thing that is, you know, he has gone for a very heavy internal martial arts focus on Bagua in particular, but also from the point of view of a meditative tradition, right? So even though he does talk about fighting and as a martial art, and he did also train with guys and do, you know, full contact fighting and stuff early on in his career, that is not his focus now. And as you can see, he's a bit of a larger gentleman these days. So I would take some of his words about combat training in this, especially, you know, the stuff later on, with a, you know, a hefty pinch of salt, you know, here and there. But the key principles and ideas are good, right? Just sometimes he has a little bit of flair to exaggerate, and I understand that. You've got to sell books, but I think this also comes from a genuine place of passion, right? Which is infectious. When you read this book, you're like, I want to try this, I want to do this style, that sounds awesome, you know, like I want to go and train with all these guys and try all these different things. So it's a very inspiring book, right? So yeah, let's talk about him. So this book also has basically his whole bio, but it's very cleverly done and in a really interesting way that I like, which is he has these little aside boxes throughout, right? So where he'll just give you a little snapshot of something, right? So this one, for example, is Tai Chi in Tokyo, and then he'll give you the year and he'll give you a little aside story about a little training journey or moment, right? So here's another one. So yeah, these aside boxes are called Personal Journey Odyssey Through the Martial Arts. His experience with Wing Chun, you know, and if he encounters a famous teacher, so that's like Chen Manqing, and he trained with him, he'll give you a little aside about that. So you get a kind of potted history of him, which, as I said, was a judo, karate, Aikido, kind of Japanese internal martial arts, and he went to study at university in Japan, and sort of, again, man after my own heart, spent most of his university days training instead of maybe studying, right? So tried all these different things, but then began to encounter Tai Chi and also this interesting form of Xingyi, which is practiced in Japan, right? I think Taiki Ken or something like that. So basically a Japanese karate guy went over, met a Xingyi teacher and was like, this is fucking awesome. So I'm going to try and practice this, right? And then sort of took it back and Japanified it, right? Gave him one belt and, made it a bit more structured, right? And then he went on to go to China and train with all these different guys, and also in Hong Kong and back in America when he was back there. So yeah, fascinating history. And then, just to close out his background, he then also went to train with so became the indoor sort of inner gate disciple of a proper Bagua master, and is basically sort of the lineage holder of that guy's style. Which is great, so, and a very heavy focus on the internal components, right? I think he had some injury or something, so, we don't blame him too much if, you got your lower back smashed in a car crash, right? And then, focus on the healing and the meditative aspects of the arts. So yeah, and brilliant, and it now runs this, I think Energy Arts is his organization, big internal Taoist-based stuff. He's got a big retreat center somewhere in the US. And lots and lots of online courses, lots and lots of instructors all over the place, all really good, authentic stuff. Again, heavy emphasis on the internal components of the training. So if that's your thing, this is a good guy to listen and hear about, because he really has heavily focused on that component, right? Good. So yeah, so that's his background. Right, let's get into the meat and bones of this big book. So what are the different parts in it? So he's got some stuff at the beginning, preface, how he goes about using Chinese. I don't agree with his method of how he transliterates the Chinese. I think we should all just use pinyin nowadays. And then I would also say use pinyin, and then if it's from Taiwan or Hong Kong, maybe use the traditional characters. But if you're going to include both, but if it's a sort of a mainly mainland-based art, depending on its origin, then use the simplified characters. That would be my preferred way of transmitting stuff. But he goes with this kind of like as it was pronounced approach, which is funny from him because he's a guy who speaks and reads Chinese, right? Like he's a fluent Mandarin speaker. So I would assume that he would go with with pinyin, but hey ho, it is what it is. But he at least explains and justifies this, which I think is a real strength, because quite a lot of the time you don't, Chinese is a complicated language, and there's a lot of history and even some politics involved in how you portray Chinese, right? So at least he goes and explains why he has done this way. I don't agree with the method that he's gone, but it's it's good that he's done that. Then he kind of breaks down, he has this section at the beginning, it's only about 15 pages, where he talks about different approaches to training martial arts, which I think is quite interesting. So, which is basically like, you can either be like an animal, where you're just like, you're trying to emulate, animals, right? Like you might be like a Shaolin, so you're actually going to try and be like dog kung fu, you're actually going to try and act like a dog and like roll around on the floor and be vicious, right? Then he talks about the human approach, which is kind of like the sort of almost the standard, right? We're trying to optimize our human performance. So for example, so you might have Shaolin type styles where you're trying to focus on being like an animal. You might have like something like Wing Chun is a good example of something that follows the human approach. So we have, clear principles and based on good human biomechanics, and then we try and optimize that performance, right? So that's the kind of very linear human approach. And then you have the sort of the spiritual approach, right? Whereas, you might be trying to focus on some higher internal development goal. So like Tai Chi or Bagua is a good example of that style of training. As I said, he has these little aside boxes. So, and like, if you want to hear about some of the top guys in internal martial arts. So for example, he's got a box on page 16 about Wang Shujin, who is an absolute legend, this Bagua Xingyi guy, enormous guy, great iron shirt. Like there's some amazing pictures of him you know, being attacked by Robert Winston Smith, who is like a Western boxer, like military boxer, you know, so not a, you know, a big dude, right? And just laying into this guy as hard as you want, and he's just sitting there going like, that's fine, right? So just great stuff. On top of that, like a pretty good internal martial artist as well. And then he sort of does that, like what's internal and what's external, and sort of talks about the theory about those, and he spends quite a while doing that. And then he goes into specifically what is, you know, how do you train in internal martial art? And his main internal martial art is Bagua, so he spends a lot of time talking about that. So if you're not into Bagua, this stuff still applies if you're doing Tai Chi or Xingyi, or even some sort of mixed internal external styles like Praying Mantis, or maybe even a little bit of Wing Chun and that kind of thing, depending on how internal your art is. I really like the section where he talks about all the different types of fighting techniques. You know, so and some of them are so violent, you know, so like neck cranks and like S throws and you know, different types of striking with the fingers, all these different types of things, just slaps, knuckle strikes, all these different ways of hitting and hurting people, which is great, right? Chi-Na throws, all that kind of stuff. A little bit about footwork. And a little bit about the different methods of training, so different types of sparring, push hand / chi sao, all that kind of stuff. And then what he does is he has this longest section on Bagua, but then he separates out and does Tai Chi and has another sort of 40 pages on Tai Chi and saying, oh, you know, this is how it's similar, but here are some differences, right? You know, Tai Chi, for example, is a little bit more yin than Bagua, right? It's a bit softer. It has different main training modality, you know, so it does the form instead of the circle walking, right? And then he does Xingyi, and this was one of my first experiences with hearing about Xingyi, which is quite rare in the West, I would say, even now. And yeah, I'd say it's a really good basic introduction to what Xingyi is. He did a bit of it, and he also did a kind of weird lineage for a while that was, you know, this Japanese lineage I mentioned. And I don't think he completed the whole system. So because, you know, there's no mention of the two-person forms, two-person sets in his training, right? So there's just one thing to highlight there. Or the linking form, for example. So some of the other sort of combined forms. So yeah, so there's a few things, but brilliant section on the fundamentals of Xingyi, the 5 elements, and you know, how to train Santi for standing, right? Standing meditation practice. Goes back to Bagua again, more emphasis on circle walking, and also then the spiritual aspects of the art, which is what he believes elevates it above the other 2 internal martial arts. Then it's a bit of a sort of left turn here, as he just goes into talking about speed training in martial arts and how it works and the difference between foot speed and speed at contact. All good stuff, all useful stuff, but I don't think really fits with the core of this book, but still interesting, right? Then he talks a little bit about energy to heal and like the healing parts of internal arts. This is not an area of expertise for me. I'm interested in the martial components of arts and also only in building yourself up, right? So I don't have any experience with that component of it. Whilst I do think that these types of arts can help fix you, I've yet to see people really, you know, like, except in the loosest sense of, you know, inspiring and producing a positive training environment and, you know, helping people build up their lives through positive example and that kind of thing, you know. So the sort of what people might say is the sort of the aura energetic component of healing. I'm sure that happens, right? When you walk into the room with Tai Chi and everyone's doing it and everyone's feeling good and everyone's feeling happy, if you had, you know, sort of on the more anxious and depressed side of things, then you can get a positive lift out of that training environment. But yeah, because he's a chi realist, you know, like he's a true believer in that, you know, there is energy in the universe that I can use to heal people. That really does influence his views. Whilst, you know, I'm not, right? So I'm a what would you call chi compatibilist, I suppose, which is like these are models for explaining things that Chinese people didn't have a good, you know, scientific model for. But we do those practices and we do feel those things, but that doesn't mean that there's anything mysterious or energetic in the universe, right? But it still leads to positive changes when we do those practices, right? Because it is probably something biomechanically that is happening, but the model that they had is probably not great, right? So that leads me to some very different conclusions from, you know, where he has, especially to do with energy healing and that sort of thing, right? So yeah, take it or leave it. If you're into that sort of thing, brilliant, go for it. He's a great person to talk about that because he's got a lot of experience, right? And then, so that kind of comes to the end. He also has a little bit about martial arts and mental health, which I think is really positive, right? Because I am a strong believer in that aspect of it, right? So we do, in internal martial arts, we do work directly with the mind. You can really use it as an adjunct and a supportive thing to support, you know, therapy and other work to help out, you know, and I definitely has helped me along with depression and other things before. So really good, you know, big thumbs up to say that, you know, this stuff can help with that, right? And then at the end, really awesome section of appendices. The appendices that go on for like 50 pages, right? Like I love a good appendix, you know. I have a PhD, I wrote scientific stuff, you know. I love a good, you know, structured appendix. So he has A, B, C, D, and E, lineages, Chinese terminology, glossary, energy anatomy of the human body, more of the background and history of Bagua and the lineage there, and also the history of Tai Chi. So just really cool, awesome collection of good information that you can't find elsewhere, all neatly summarized. I often come back and refer to some of this stuff at the back here. He's also got some really interesting things, warnings about different Qigong methods that maybe you shouldn't do, or, you know, be careful and make sure you always train with a teacher. So, which of course, when I read them meant that I immediately went and tried to do them without, you know, without that, you know, but very, very good. Brilliant book. You know, I'd say I would just call it the big book of internal martial arts, right? If you're studying internal martial arts, I really recommend it. Remember, so just, you know, definite thumbs up. Remember that this guy has a heavy focus on the deep internal components of training for sort of meditative practice. So if your primary aim is martial prowess, maybe this isn't the best book for you, but it's still an excellent book. And it really, his enthusiasm for internal martial arts is infectious, and it's a great read. And it's a book that I've come back to several times over the course of my training to reread and pick out snippets again. Good. Yeah, let me know if you want me to review any of his other books, because I have a couple of them. I'm also got Opening the Energy Gates of Your Body and a couple of his other books as well. I think his big book of Tai Chi I've got as well. So yeah, let me know if you want to review any of BK Frantzis's books. Or move on to other sort of Tai Chi, Xingyi, other areas, right? As normal, please do like, share and subscribe, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon, and enjoy reading all of these Kung Fu books together. See you next time.